38, requesting city council approval of the electric and gas in lieu of tax payments distribution for fiscal year 2011.
Commissioners, I'll recognize Jamie Davis, the manager of accounting, to give you this report. As you know, we do this annually. This is the way we give back to our community, and we do it in all jurisdictions.
Commissioners, presented for your consideration today is Resolution 1238, which requests City Council set both the magnitude and distribution this year's in lieu of taxes for our electric and gas divisions. As you may recall from prior years, state law and existing arrangements with the taxing jurisdiction gives us guidance on how to calculate these amounts and how we distribute them. You may recall that the calculation brings into consideration KUB's net plant values, the location of where that plant is at, the taxing rates within those particular jurisdictions, as well as a 3-year average of gross margin. Prior to your consideration of today's resolution, I'd like to review just some of the highlights for you. This year's in lieu of tax payments total nearly $20.5 million, and that represents about an $800,000 increase from prior fiscal year, approximately 3.9%. And while we've seen growth in all of our divisions in the amount of tax we pay, we've specifically seen in this year in our electric and gas payments about $500,000 increase, or approximately 3.4%. As I stated before, these are governed by state law, and as such, KUB is required to consult with City Council before these amounts are paid, are set. And as such, today's approval of this resolution will indeed meet all statutory requirements for consultation. We'll pay these amounts at the end of the fiscal year on June 30th. Now, water and wastewater are not part of today's resolution, but I want to kind of review those with you as well because we'll be paying those at the end of this month. As you can see, for water and wastewater, total taxes for this year about $5 million, about $2 million for our water division, about $3 million for our wastewater division. Now, in contrast with state law, or in contrast with electric and gas, these are not governed by state law. They're governed solely by city charter, and as such, City Council's approval is not required to approve these before these amounts are paid. These amounts have increased approximately $300,000 from prior year, about 5.2%. So we'll be paying those at the end of this month. If you take a look at how these are distributed amongst the taxing jurisdictions, you can see that the city of Knoxville will receive approximately $12.9 million this year in their in lieu of taxes. That represents over a $500,000 increase from prior fiscal year, represents about a 4.3% increase. The city will receive approximately 63% of all of our in lieu of tax payments this year. Right below them, you can see Knox County. They'll receive about $7 million this fiscal year. That represents almost a $200,000 increase, or about 2.7% increase from prior fiscal year. They will receive approximately 34% of all of the in lieu of tax payments we'll make this year. And then you can see the other taxing jurisdictions there. Of note, there were no major tax actions in any of our tax rate changes in any of these particular jurisdictions. If we look over the past 10 years, you can see the total growth rate for in lieu of taxes for KUB have been about 3.2%. Those total payments represent on an average annual basis about 3.1% of our gross revenue. In terms of the growth rate for the city, you'll see that it's about 4%. Their annual payment represents about 7.7% of their general fund revenue. And then finally there for the county, their growth rate over the last 10 years has been about 1.5%. And that represents about 4.5% of their general fund revenue. So as we mentioned before, Resolution 1238 requests that City Council set the amounts for electric and gas tax equivalent payments this year and provide for their distribution. Those payments total approximately $15.5 million. The resolution that's before you provides for both the calculation of their amounts and their distribution. And delivery of this resolution does satisfy that statutory requirement for consultation. Both the city and the county have been notified as to the proposed amounts for this year, and upon appropriate passage of this resolution, our intent is to have this placed on the council agenda sometime later this spring. So I'll be glad to answer any other questions you may have.
Go back 2 slides. Yeah, that one there. I always ask this every year. I can never remember. We're the city's, in essence, largest taxpayer, right?
Yes, that is correct.
What's their annual budget ballpark?
I know their general fund revenues, I think, but we provide for 7.7% of.
Okay, so we're set. We make up about 7.5% of their budget.
you go to the next slide graph, the growth in the city is pretty much outsteps the growth of the county in terms of our payment. I just wonder, that's not really very reflective of the development in terms of our new customers.
True, but at the same point in time, remember the calculation takes into consideration our net plant, and remember about the growth that's going on in our wastewater division, where the infrastructure there, while we're replacing a given asset, that is a much more newer distribution system, as well as it's got a fairly high net plant value right now within the wastewater division itself. The growth of those particular in lieu tax payments have been growing a little more rapidly, as well as they receive all of the distribution for the water and wastewater payments.
That's the key. The county doesn't receive anything on water and wastewater. If you look back over the last 10 years, that's where really the growth has been, in particular wastewater.
Other questions?
I move we approve resolution 1238.
Motion and a second. Comments or questions from the public? No? Mr. Coley, roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Anderson? Commissioner Canal? Commissioner Jones?
Aye.
Commissioner Robinson? Commissioner Simmons? Commissioner Thompson? Commissioner Williams? Resolution 1238 is passed.
Resolution,
Can I ask a
Yes,
question
sir.
that I should have asked, not that I'm shaking my vote? But I know that there's some flexibility in whether we pay the maximum amount. Is that just in electric and gas? But we are paying.
Electric, gas.
I failed to mention that these amounts do represent the maximum.
Resolution 1239, replacing the existing electric rate schedules of the electric division, providing for changes in electric rate structures as necessitated by TVA's wholesale rate structure change.
Commissioners, you have two resolutions, 1239 and 1240, that are attendant to each other. They come from TVA's new method for doing wholesale rates to us. Last month, you had a comprehensive presentation by Sherry Johnson. Today, Mark Walker is going to review those two items in anticipation of this matter being considered by you on first reading.
Commissioners, as Ms. Rhodes stated, TVA has adopted a new wholesale rate structure, which basically sets forth how they're going to charge their distributors for their monthly power purchases. And in response to that, distributors, including KUB, are needing to make modifications to their retail electric rate structures. And that's basically what we have brought before you today in resolutions 1239 and 1240. And I would like to point out that the changes that we are proposing are basically designed to ensure that KUB does not take on any undue risk or any new risk associated with cash flow or the over or under recovery of power costs. And I'll go into a little bit more detail on that, but the changes are necessary to ensure that we don't take on really basically any new risk. The TVA board back in August actually adopted the new wholesale rate structure to be effective this April. And basically the new structure has both a demand or capacity component and an energy component to it. And both of those components, the prices on those will be different depending upon the time period of the year. During TVA peak periods, those prices will be higher. During off-peak periods, they will be lower. And really the intention is to begin to send a price signal to distributors about when TVA's cost of generation is higher than other periods of time. So why is TVA making this change after 20 years? And really the reason lies in the fact that their generation capacity is not sufficient to meet their summer peak demands that they are projecting basically going forward as of 2012. If you looked at it on a chart, you would see basically existing generation capacity, and above that you would see their peak demands. And over time, starting in 2012, the peak demand will be greater than their existing generation capacity. They won't be able to meet the power supply needs of the valley. Now, one way they can address that is making purchases off system, and they do that in part today. But as time goes by and that gap widens, even that would not be sufficient. So how does TVA solve that problem? Well, really two ways. One is add some generation capacity, and they do intend to do that over the next few years. There will be some additional nuclear generation they plan to add in the years to come, and also some natural gas fuel generation that they plan to add. But that in of itself will not be sufficient long-term to address that gap between the peak and their generation capacity. So several years ago, they've embarked on some initiatives designed to reduce that peak demand. Basically, if the capacity's here, they want to reduce that level of demand as well. You're more familiar with them in many of these rate programs. Ed had one today on the two-part real-time pricing that TVA has implemented over the last several years. They're designed for the large electric industrial customers to provide them economic incentives to shift their power usage from TVA's peak periods to their off-peak periods. And KUB, like many distributors, has had a number of customers participate in those programs. But this change in the wholesale rate structure is another step in that direction. And that now that TVA is looking at the valley as a whole, as opposed to a small population of customers, to begin to send price signals that ultimately will reduce peak demands. So that's the reason for the structural change. As I previously mentioned, the structure itself will now have two components. One is demand and one is energy. The demand is basically distributors will now be paying TVA in part based upon the level of our system peak each month. So basically you'd look over the course of a month, a 30-day period, and that hour that represents the highest amount of usage on KUB's electric system based upon our customer demands, we will be billed upon that at a demand rate. We'll also be billed based upon all the kilowatt hours, the energy that our customers use as well, or that we take from TVA. Now, TVA has designed the rates in a way that distributors' power costs, our annual total power costs paid to TVA, are not expected to be significantly different. Just separating it into two different components, demand and energy. And really with the peak on the demand, paying on the system peak, that is a key for distributors. Now we have a vested interest in what our system peaks are. Previously, or under the current rate structure, and for the past 20 years, it didn't really matter to us what our system peaks were. We pay TVA based upon what our customers use, and that's it. The more they use, that's fine. It's just a direct flow through. But now that level of peak is important because if we efficiently manage our electric system, and we can maybe install certain equipment on the system, work with our customers, we can reduce the level of our system peak, lower what we pay TVA, and provide lower bills to our customers. So now it's important to us. And that also works to TVA's benefit because if our system peak is important to us now, we work to reduce it, that helps reduce their peak demand as well. Any questions on that? Does that make sense? And also one thing to point out, an important point, that the rate differentials between seasons, that second bullet, the rate differentials between seasons, initially that's going to be very small. And we'll see that when we look at some of the proposed retail rates in a moment. Over time, you would expect that TVA will increase those pricing differences. If they're really going to achieve their objective of reducing their peak demand, over time those pricing differences would be greater. And also, right now, it's just prices are only going to change by season. Over time, TVA intends for all distributors, not only for their prices to vary by season, but day of week and time of day as well. So this is really considered setting the structure in place to achieve reductions in peak demand over the long term. There will be more changes to come in probably the years to follow. So how does the new wholesale structure impact KUB? Well, we've already talked about this somewhat, but basically our monthly bill will be based upon the total energy and the system peak. And it is that system peak that's really the key in how it's going to impact KUB. We're going to pay TVA based upon actual peak. But what we include in the rates that we charge our customers, that component of the rate for wholesale power cost, part of it will be based upon our average system peak, looking over a 3-year base period. We obviously don't know what that actual peak is going to be in any given month, so we recover from our customers based upon average. but we pay TVA based upon actual. So for any given month, the actual is going to be different from the average that's embedded in our rates, and what we're recovering our customers is based upon. So in a month when the actual peak is greater than the average peak, we're going to pay TVA more than we're going to recover from our customers. And that's really the key with that third bullet, and that is probably the biggest impact of everything that we'll talk about today, is that this new rate structure creates the potential for us to under or over recover our power costs from TVA on a long-term basis. It's more than just a timing issue that it would all work out over a certain period of time. It perpetually could be a significant issue going forward. And one of the proposed changes to our electric rate structure will address that issue. Does that make sense? Is that clear?
So it's not just these, the big customers, this is system-wide?
This is system-wide now. And again, those pricing differences are very small, and we'll show some examples of our retail rates in a moment. So it's really not a significant thing, but the whole point is setting the structure to look valley-wide as opposed to just a small population of, say, the Gerdows of the world or the really large electric customers.
Mark, they've been looking at this for a long time.
They have. They have. This is something that they've been in discussion with distributors for almost 2 years about, and there's been tweaks and modifications over time. Initially, they wanted to put this into effect back in October of 2010, but distributors worked with them and sort of convinced that we need more time. We need to do some parallel billing to make sure everything is going to work out appropriately, going from one structure to another. But we're all set for April now.
And they're not reinventing some magical rate structure, they're mirroring what's standard in the industry.
That is correct. That last bullet point, I can't get any of these things to work. But the last bullet point there, this is the standard in the industry. And basically, the rate structure we've been under for the last 2 decades here in the Valley is an anomaly. People look upon it and say, well, that's just bizarre how that works. So this is really a transition to the way the rest of the world works. Okay, let's talk about